Claire Whitmore drove the silver Jaguar XJS into the small two-bay garage at the edge of Cedar Bay for the fourth Thursday in a row and asked Ethan Brooks to check a vibration that neither of them could actually feel. The engine sounded clean, the steering column was steady, the brakes had been replaced less than 6 months earlier. By every mechanical standard available, the car was fine. Still, Claire came back every Thursday. The garage sat near the old marina, where the pavement cracked into weeds and salt air drifted permanently through the open service doors. There was no illuminated sign above the entrance, no polished showroom floor, no waiting lounge with espresso machines and leather chairs. Just faded blue paint peeling from wooden walls, the smell of motor oil soaked into concrete over 30 years, and the low, rhythmic sound of metal tools against steel. And a man named Ethan Brooks, wiping his hands on a worn grey rag, like someone who had long ago stopped caring whether the world found him impressive. Ethan was 39 years old, broad-shouldered in the quiet, durable way manual labour shapes a body over time. He stood a little over 6 feet, lean without trying to be, with dark brown hair that had begun turning silver near his temples sometime after his wife died. The people in Cedar Bay often described him as calm, though the word never fully covered it. Ethan moved through life with the careful patience of a man who had once lost something important very suddenly and had since learned not to rush anything that remained. 3 years earlier, his wife Amelia had died from a rare autoimmune disease that consumed her body in less than 11 months. Before the illness, Ethan had been louder, quicker to laugh, more likely to stay late drinking beer at the marina with the other mechanics. Afterward, he became quieter, without becoming cold. Grief had not hardened him. It had simply sanded away everything unnecessary. Now his world revolved almost entirely around his 8-year-old daughter. Every morning before school, Ethan braided Lily's hair with the focused seriousness of someone performing precision engine work. He packed her lunch himself, usually turkey sandwiches cut unevenly because he was still terrible with kitchen knives, and walked her to Cedar Bay Elementary with grease still caught beneath the lines of his knuckles. People in town noticed things like that. They noticed because men like Ethan had become rare. Lily Brooks looked almost exactly like her mother, except for the eyes. Amelia had possessed soft green eyes that made people instinctively lower their voices around her. Lily's eyes were darker, sharper, constantly studying things. She was small for her age, all thin arms and untamed brown curls, usually carrying a stuffed rabbit missing one button eye. Her teacher once described her as observant in the way adults describe children who notice more than they should. Claire Whitmore noticed her immediately, the first afternoon she walked into the garage. Claire was 38, tall and striking in the severe, polished way certain women from large cities become after years of boardrooms and controlled expressions. She wore fitted camel coats, black heels entirely unsuited for gravel parking lots, and gold jewelry so understated it probably cost more than Ethan earned in 3 months. Her dark hair was always pinned neatly back, though the ocean wind along the marina occasionally loosened strands she never seemed aware of. People tended to assume Claire was cold within the first 30 seconds of meeting her. They were usually wrong. What she actually was careful. Claire had spent 15 years as a senior corporate attorney in Seattle, representing development firms wealthy enough to erase entire neighborhoods with signatures and permits. Precision had become survival in her profession. Emotion complicated negotiations. Sympathy delayed outcomes. Over time, she had trained herself into becoming someone who spoke softly, even when angry, and smiled politely, without revealing anything genuine beneath it. But there were moments the performance slipped. Lily saw those moments before anyone else did. The fourth Thursday Claire visited the garage, Ethan finished inspecting the Jaguar in less than 20 minutes, and told her the same thing he had told her twice already. There's nothing wrong with the car. Claire nodded as though she expected the answer. That's good, she said, but she did not leave. Instead, she wandered slowly toward the small office near the back wall, where old photographs hung beside shelves full of service manuals and rusted trophies from local racing events decades old. One photograph sat slightly apart from the others. Ethan, standing beside Amelia on a windy beach, with Lily as a baby wrapped in a yellow blanket between them. Claire stopped in front of it, and Lily noticed her hand tighten unconsciously around the silver bracelet on her wrist. It happened every time. Not dramatic enough for most adults to catch. Just the smallest motion in her fingers, like someone gripping the edge of a memory before it disappeared. Lily sat cross-legged near the soda machine, pretending to draw while secretly watching her. Children often mistake curiosity for coincidence. Lily did not. Outside, rain clouds gathered over the marina, while Ben Carter crossed the street carrying a camera bag over one shoulder and 2 coffees balanced in one hand. Ben was 34, permanently underdressed and mildly sleep-deprived, with sandy blonde hair that looked wind-damaged year-round. He worked for the Cedar Bay Gazette, though calling it a newspaper was generous. The Gazette occupied a single cramped office above a bait shop and survived mostly through obituaries and high school football coverage. Ben stayed because he loved the town too much to leave it. He pushed open the garage door with his elbow and handed Ethan a coffee. "You get the letter too?" he asked. Ethan looked up from the Jaguar's open hood. "What letter?" Ben pulled a folded envelope from his jacket pocket and tossed it onto the workbench. Ethan opened it slowly, while Claire remained near the office doorway, pretending not to listen. Inside was an offer to purchase the garage property for nearly 4 times its market value. Ben watched Ethan carefully. "That's the 6th property on this block," he said. "Same company, same lawyer." Ethan read the number once, folded the paper again, and set it beside a socket wrench. Then he returned to tightening a bolt beneath the Jaguar hood. Ben laughed quietly. "You're not even tempted." Ethan shrugged. "My daughter likes it here." He said it simply. Like that answered everything. And for him, it probably did. Claire looked at him then with an expression Lily could not fully understand. Not surprise exactly. Something quieter, something sadder. A gull cried somewhere beyond the marina. Rain began tapping softly against the roof. And while Ethan Brooks continued working on a car that did not need repairs, his daughter watched a woman from another world stare too long at a photograph she should not have recognized. And for the first time since Claire Whitmore had arrived in Cedar Bay, Lily began to wonder whether the woman coming every Thursday was not searching for a mechanic at all. Lily Brooks began watching Thursdays the way other children watched birthdays or snow forecasts. She counted the days quietly in the margins of her school notebooks, circling each Thursday in dull pencil until the paper nearly tore beneath the pressure. By the middle of October, she knew the exact sound Claire Whitmore's Jaguar made before it turned into the gravel lot outside the garage. A low, smooth engine note that seemed too elegant for Cedar Bay, like something from another life accidentally drifting into theirs once a week. Children notice patterns long before adults do, and Lily had started noticing too many. The following Thursday, school ended early because a storm front was moving toward the coast. Parents arrived in pickup trucks and muddy SUVs, while teachers hurried children toward the parking lot beneath darkening skies. Ethan had called earlier that morning to say he might be late picking her up because an old Chevy truck had arrived with transmission damage severe enough to require the entire gearbox removed before evening. Lily told him she could wait in the library. Instead, she took her bicycle. The wind coming off the marina carried the cold, damp smell of incoming rain as she pedaled through town, staying far enough behind the silver Jaguar to avoid being noticed. Claire drove slowly through Cedar Bay, one hand resting lightly against the steering wheel, sunglasses hiding most of her face despite the grey weather. She passed the garage entirely. That was new. Lily followed her beyond the bait shops and weather-beaten seafood diners near the harbour until the road curved east toward the oldest section of town. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking the water, enclosed by rusted iron fencing and enormous maple trees whose leaves had already begun turning deep orange. Claire parked beside the gate and remained inside the car for nearly 2 full minutes before stepping out. She looked different there. Not weaker exactly, just less assembled. The wind loosened strands of dark hair from the careful knot at the base of her neck, and for the first time since Lily had known her, Claire Whitmore appeared uncertain where to place her hands. She carried no flowers, no umbrella, only the silver bracelet around her wrist catching pale light whenever she moved. Lily hid her bicycle behind a stone wall and watched from beneath the branches of a cedar tree near the entrance. Claire walked slowly through the cemetery until she stopped beneath a massive maple near the eastern edge, overlooking the sea cliffs. From where Lily stood, she could not see the name on the gravestone, only Claire standing motionless before it, while rain began falling softly around her. Then Claire's phone rang. She answered immediately, turning slightly away from the wind.
"I know," she said quietly. "No, I haven't told him." A pause. Claire closed her eyes briefly. "Because I'm not ready yet." Another silence. Then, softer still, "I said I'm not ready to tell him." Lily felt something tighten in her stomach. Children rarely understand adult conversations fully, but they understand tone with terrifying accuracy, and Claire Whitmore sounded afraid. Back at the garage, Ethan Brooks worked beneath the lifted Chevy truck with grease along both forearms and an old country station playing low through a dusty radio balanced near the tool chest. He had spent the afternoon replacing rusted bearings while rain rattled against the metal roof overhead. At 5:30, he glanced toward the clock and frowned. Lily should have been there by now. Ethan removed his gloves and reached for his phone just as the garage door opened and Ben Carter stepped inside, carrying a folder swollen with papers. Ben looked worse than usual. His blonde hair was damp from rain, his glasses spotted with water, and dark circles sat beneath his eyes from too many nights spent reading public records under fluorescent office lights. Unlike Ethan, who had settled into grief quietly, Ben had become sharper after his divorce 5 years earlier, faster talking, more restless, as though silence itself irritated him now. "You seen Lily?" Ethan asked immediately. "At the library, I thought." Ethan shook his head once. Ben noticed the shift in his expression and set the folder down. "She's probably fine." "She's 8. "She's your daughter," Ben corrected. "That kid could survive a government collapse." Despite himself, Ethan smiled faintly. Then Ben opened the folder. "You know who's representing the development company buying property around the marina?" Ethan returned to cleaning his hands with a rag. "Don't care." "You should." Ben slid a printed document across the workbench. At the top sat the name Whitmore and Vale Corporate Litigation, Seattle. Ethan stared at it briefly. "The woman with the Jaguar?" he asked. Ben nodded slowly. "That woman." The rain intensified outside. For several seconds neither man spoke. Finally, Ethan folded the paper carefully and handed it back. "Doesn't mean anything." "That's exactly what worries me," Ben replied. Across town, Lily remained hidden near the cemetery gates while Claire returned to the Jaguar and drove away toward the marina. But instead of heading directly to the garage, Claire stopped outside the Cedar Bay retirement house near the waterfront. The building was old and permanently smelled faintly of salt water and medicine. Inside lived mostly retired fishermen and widows who had nowhere else to go. Lily watched through rain-speckled windows as Claire spoke with Mrs. Alvarez, the elderly director of the home. Mrs. Elena Alvarez was a small Puerto Rican woman in her late 60s, with silver hair cropped close to her head and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had spent 30 years working as a nurse before taking over the retirement house after her husband drowned during a winter fishing storm. Grief had made her practical rather than bitter. Claire handed her an envelope. Mrs. Alvarez looked startled, then emotional. Claire only shook her head once before leaving quickly. Later that night, after Ethan finally found Lily riding home soaked from rain and trying unsuccessfully to hide where she had been, he made spaghetti and meatballs using Amelia's handwritten recipe taped crookedly inside the kitchen cabinet. Lily watched him quietly while he cooked. Her father moved easily through the small kitchen, tired but gentle,
humming under his breath without realizing it. Sometimes Lily wondered whether grief became easier with time. Other times, she suspected adults simply became better at hiding it. That night, after Lily pretended to fall asleep on the couch, she saw Ethan step alone onto the back porch, carrying a cup of coffee into the cold darkness overlooking the sea. And somewhere across Cedar Bay, Claire Whitmore sat alone in a rented house near the cliffs, staring at a photograph she still could not bring herself to explain. Because some secrets did not become easier with time, they only became heavier. Rain had been falling over Cedar Bay since early morning, the kind of steady coastal rain that blurred the marina into grey shapes and filled the gutters with seawater and dead maple leaves. Ethan Brooks spent most of the afternoon beneath a rusted Chevrolet pickup, replacing a damaged fuel line, while old jazz crackled softly through the garage radio. The heater near the workbench clicked every few minutes, without producing much actual warmth. Claire Whitmore arrived shortly after 3, carrying the same quiet composure she always wore into the garage, though the storm had dampened the edges of it. Her dark coat clung slightly to her shoulders from rain, and loose strands of hair framed a face that looked more tired than usual. Ethan noticed it immediately, but said nothing. Over the years, he had developed the habit of allowing people their privacy unless they offered otherwise. "The steering feels strange again," Claire said. Ethan glanced toward the Jaguar parked outside. "It felt strange last week too," he answered mildly. For the briefest second, Claire almost smiled. That was becoming more common around him, though neither of them acknowledged it. Near the soda machine, Lily sat wrapped in an oversized sweatshirt, drawing quietly in a notebook, while an elderly golden retriever slept beside her chair. The dog belonged to Mr. Delaney, an old fisherman whose truck Ethan serviced every winter without charging him full price. The retriever, Murphy, was nearly 12 years old, slow-moving and half-blind in one eye after a boating accident years earlier. Murphy trusted Ethan completely and followed him around the garage whenever storms rolled in. Outside, thunder rolled low over the harbor. Claire removed her keys while speaking with Ethan near the service counter, then absent-mindedly set them beside a stack of invoices before stepping outside to take a phone call beneath the awning. 10 minutes later, Ethan slid out from beneath the truck and wiped his hands on a rag. "Lily," he called gently, "can you grab the socket kit from Claire's trunk?" She nodded immediately. The Jaguar unlocked with a soft electronic click when she pressed the key fob. Lily lifted the trunk carefully and froze. Inside sat a small wooden box worn smooth with age, tied shut with faded blue ribbon. Rainlight from outside reflected softly against the polished wood. Resting on top of the box was a photograph, her mother, younger than Lily had ever seen her. Amelia Brooks stood laughing beside Claire Whitmore on a crowded city street beneath strings of white cafe lights. Amelia's hair was longer then, wind-blown across her cheeks, one arm looped casually through Claire's, while both women smiled with the relaxed happiness of people who belonged naturally in each other's lives. Lily stared at the photograph without breathing. She had spent years memorizing every picture of her mother that existed inside their house. This one had never been there. Beneath the photo sat dozens of unopened letters, bundled carefully together with twine. Every envelope carried the same handwriting: Amelia Brooks. Lily reached toward them slowly. "Don't!" Claire's voice came sharply from behind her. Lily turned so quickly she nearly dropped the photograph. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Bay, Claire Whitmore looked completely undone. The color had drained from her face. Her breathing seemed uneven, one hand gripping the edge of the trunk hard enough for her knuckles to pale beneath the silver bracelet. Not angry, terrified, like someone who had spent years locking a door, only to discover it standing open. For several seconds, neither of them spoke. Rain hammered softly against the marina pavement nearby. Then Claire stepped forward carefully and took the photograph from Lily's hands with surprising gentleness.
"I'm sorry,"
Lily whispered instinctively. Claire closed the trunk immediately. "It's okay," she said, though her voice sounded distant now. You didn't do anything wrong." But she left less than 2 minutes later, no explanation, no lingering conversation with Ethan, just a quiet thank you before disappearing into the storm with the photograph and the wooden box hidden once again inside the Jaguar. That evening, the rain finally weakened into mist, drifting over the harbour lights. Ethan sat outside the small house behind the garage, repairing Lily's bicycle beneath a yellow porch lamp while she watched from the steps, wrapped in a blanket. The bicycle had once belonged to Amelia. The paint had faded badly over the years, but Ethan kept fixing it anyway. He adjusted the loose bell carefully until it rang properly again. "There," he said softly. "Good as new." Lily wanted to ask him about Claire, about the photograph, about the letters carrying her mother's name in handwriting she no longer recognized. But then Ethan smiled faintly at the crooked bicycle bell, like repairing tiny broken things still mattered. And Lily suddenly understood something children rarely understand early enough. Her father was still repairing himself too. Across town, Ben Carter sat alone inside the Gazette office, surrounded by stacks of property records and cold coffee cups, when he noticed the black sedan parked across the street for the third consecutive night. The driver never got out, never moved, just watched the building with the engine running beneath the rain. Ben stared back through the window for a long moment before slowly lowering the blinds. And for the first time since beginning his investigation into Cedar Bay's land acquisitions, he began seriously considering the possibility that someone wanted him afraid. The rain started before sunset and settled over Cedar Bay like a second sky, thick against the marina windows and loud enough on the garage roof to swallow most conversation whole. Ethan Brooks stayed late that evening, finishing work on an old Dodge pickup, while Lily sat inside the office, coloring beside a small electric heater that hummed unevenly every few minutes. Claire Whitmore arrived just after 7, not in the careful, composed way she usually entered the garage, but quietly, almost cautiously, as though she had spent the entire drive trying to decide whether to turn around. She stood near the doorway for several seconds before speaking. "We need to talk." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, then glanced toward Lily. "Kiddo," he said gently, "why don't you go feed Murphy for me?" Lily hesitated. She wanted to stay, but something in her father's voice told her this was adult territory now. She disappeared toward the back storage room where the old retriever slept on folded blankets beside the water heater. The garage fell quiet, except for rain striking metal. Claire removed her gloves slowly. Her hands trembled slightly for the first time Ethan had ever seen. Without the polished armor she normally wore, Claire looked older tonight. Not physically older, but tired in a deeper way, like someone who had carried guilt carefully for too many years because putting it down would require explaining it. Finally, she reached into her bag and placed the photograph from the Jaguar trunk onto the workbench between them. Ethan stared at it silently. Amelia, young, laughing, alive. For a moment, the entire garage seemed to narrow around that single image. Claire spoke before she lost the nerve. 15 years ago, she said quietly, I was driving back from Tacoma after working 30 hours straight on a merger case. I fell asleep at the wheel. The rain intensified against the roof. My car rolled 3 times on Highway 8. She paused once, gathering herself. I remember smoke, glass everywhere. I remember thinking I was going to die before anyone even found me. Ethan listened without interruption. That's when Amelia stopped. Claire's voice softened around the name automatically. She pulled over in the middle of the storm and climbed into the car before the fire spread. A faint breath escaped her. The paramedics later told me most people would have waited for emergency crews. Amelia didn't. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly toward the photograph. That sounded exactly like his wife. Claire smiled faintly through the sadness. She stayed with me at the hospital for almost 11 hours, even after they told her I'd survive. For the first time since arriving in Cedar Bay, Claire's expression changed completely while speaking about Amelia. The careful distance vanished. What remained underneath was warmth so genuine it almost hurt to witness. She talked too much, Claire said softly. About books, about music, about wanting to see Italy someday, even though she hated flying. A quiet laugh escaped Ethan before he could stop it. "Yeah," he murmured, "that sounds like her too." Claire looked down at the silver bracelet around her wrist. "After that, we became friends, real friends, the kind where weeks could pass without speaking, but nothing changed." She explained how Amelia visited Seattle often during her photography years before Lily was born. How the two of them spent late nights eating terrible diner food while Claire buried herself in corporate law, and Amelia kept insisting there was more to life than deadlines and billable hours. "She used to tell me I was sprinting through my own life so fast I'd miss it completely." Claire smiled sadly. She was probably right. Then came New York, promotions, international clients, endless flights. Claire climbed higher inside the legal world, while slowly allowing entire pieces of herself to disappear beneath the career she had spent years building. Phone calls became emails. Emails became holidays. Then, eventually, nothing. When I finally came back looking for her, Claire stopped speaking. She didn't need to finish. Ethan already understood. For several moments, only rain filled the silence between them. Then Claire reached carefully into her bag again and removed the stack of letters tied with faded ribbon. "She wrote these," Claire whispered. "I never opened them." Ethan frowned slightly. "Why not?" Claire's answer came almost immediately. "Because I knew if I did, I'd have to face how long I waited." In the back room, Lily sat quietly beside Murphy, listening to muffled voices through the wall, while the old retriever rested his heavy head against her leg. She could not hear every word, only fragments. Her mother's name, Seattle, friend. And once, unexpectedly, her father laughing softly for the first time in weeks. Across town, Ben Carter published the first article exposing illegal pressure tactics tied to Cedar Bay's property acquisitions. By midnight, printed copies of the Gazette sat inside every diner and gas station in town. The article named shell companies, forged valuation reports, and elderly homeowners threatened into selling property beneath market value. By morning, people in Cedar Bay were angry, really angry. At the marina, fishermen argued loudly outside coffee shops. Store owners pinned copies of the article in their windows. Someone spray-painted, "Leave our town alone," across a construction sign near the Harbor Road before sunrise. And somewhere inside the growing storm surrounding Cedar Bay, Claire Whitmore sat across from the husband of the woman she never stopped missing, finally telling the truth she had carried alone for far too long. The storm reached Cedar Bay just after midnight. Not the ordinary coastal rainstorms the town had grown used to over decades beside the Pacific, but something heavier and meaner, with winds strong enough to shake storefront windows and tides rising high against the marina walls before dawn even arrived. Emergency sirens echoed through town while fishing boats strained violently against their ropes in the harbor. By 1 in the morning, seawater had already begun flooding the lower streets near the docks. Ethan Brooks stood inside the garage, ankle-deep in freezing water, trying to move a rusted Mustang onto higher blocks before the engine compartment flooded completely. Rain hammered through the open bay doors, sideways beneath the wind. Every few minutes the lights flickered hard enough to leave the garage in darkness for several terrifying seconds before returning again. Lily sat bundled in blankets near the office heater, with Murphy pressed heavily against her legs. The old retriever whined softly every time thunder cracked overhead. At 12 years old, Murphy had grown frightened of storms after spending too many winters trapped aboard violent fishing boats with his former owner. "Dad," Lily called quietly over the wind, "the water's getting higher." "I know, kiddo." Ethan's shirt clung soaped against his back while he tightened chains around the Mustang's axle. He had already moved 3 customer vehicles uphill behind the garage, but the tide was rising faster than expected. Then headlights cut through the rain outside. A silver Jaguar turned sharply into the flooded gravel lot. Lily blinked in surprise. "No way," she whispered. Claire Whitmore climbed out into knee-deep water, wearing a dark raincoat already drenched through completely. Her hair had escaped its usual careful arrangement, rain plastering loose strands against her face, while wind pushed hard enough to stagger her sideways crossing the lot. Ethan stared at her. "You shouldn't be here." Claire ignored him entirely. "What needs moving first?" There was no hesitation in her voice, no polished distance left, just urgency. For the next several hours they worked side by side beneath flickering lights and screaming wind. Ethan guided cars while Claire hauled chains, sandbags, toolboxes, anything heavy enough to keep equipment from floating. Salt water soaked through their boots. Mud covered Claire's expensive clothes beyond saving. She never once complained. Lily watched from the office doorway, wrapped in blankets while Murphy slept against her feet. And slowly, almost without realizing it, she noticed something strange happening to her father. Ethan was laughing. Not constantly, not loudly, but little pieces of laughter escaped him throughout the night whenever Claire slipped in the mud or argued stubbornly about carrying equipment too heavy for her. It was the first time Lily had heard that sound from him so often since her mother died. At 3 a.m, the power finally failed completely. The garage dropped into darkness, except for one emergency lantern hanging near the workbench. Rainwater dripped steadily from the ceiling, while the storm howled outside like something alive. Claire sat heavily against the wall, trying to catch her breath. Her hands trembled from exhaustion and cold. Ethan handed her a towel silently. "You really didn't have to come," he said. Claire looked toward Lily, sleeping now beside Murphy, beneath piles of blankets. "Yes," she answered quietly. "I did." For a long moment neither spoke. Then Claire finally said the thing she had been carrying since arriving in Cedar Bay. "I was the lead attorney on the acquisition project." The storm outside seemed suddenly quieter. Ethan did not react immediately. Claire stared at the lantern light reflecting against flooded concrete. "The company hired me 2 years ago to oversee redevelopment contracts for the coastline." Her voice sounded tired now, stripped of every professional layer she normally hid behind. Hotels, resorts, luxury properties. And Cedar Bay. Claire nodded once. "I didn't know what this place actually was when we started." A pause. To them it was just land. Ethan leaned back against the workbench, silently listening. Claire laughed softly then, though there was no humor in it. "You know the worst part?" she asked. "I was good at it." The honesty of that sentence hung heavily between them. She explained how the company pressured elderly homeowners into signing undervalued contracts, manipulated zoning reports, buried environmental violations beneath shell corporations. At first, Claire treated it like every other corporate case she had handled over the years, until she arrived in Cedar Bay, until she saw Ethan fixing bicycles on his porch at night, until she watched Lily waiting for her father outside school every afternoon, until the town stopped feeling abstract. "I kept thinking about Amelia," Claire admitted quietly, "about what she would have said if she saw what I became." Outside, thunder rolled again across the marina. Then Claire reached into her soaked leather bag and pulled out a thick, waterproof folder. "I copied everything before I left Seattle." Ethan frowned slightly. Inside sat contracts, internal emails, forged valuation reports, legal memos detailing deliberate pressure campaigns against property owners around the harbor. Enough to destroy the entire project. "Ben has copies already," Claire said. At nearly the same moment across town, Ben Carter sat inside the Gazette office beside a portable generator while reading through the files Claire had delivered earlier that evening. His hands shook slightly as he turned page after page. Because this was no longer suspicion. This was proof. And somewhere, beyond the storm swallowing Cedar Bay whole, powerful people were about to realize someone inside their own operation had betrayed them. 3 weeks after the storm, the redevelopment project over Cedar Bay collapsed publicly and all at once. The articles Ben Carter published spread far beyond the small coastal town that had first printed them on cheap grey newspaper sheets. Regional stations picked up the story first, then Seattle outlets. Then, national media began circling the scandal after leaked internal documents revealed fraudulent appraisals, illegal intimidation tactics, and deliberate attempts to force elderly residents from waterfront property. By the end of the month, the acquisition project had been suspended indefinitely, pending federal investigation. For the first time in nearly a year, Cedar Bay exhaled. People who had spent months quietly packing belongings into cardboard boxes unpacked them again. Hand-painted protest signs disappeared from storefront windows. Fishermen returned to arguing about weather instead of lawsuits. Even the marina looked different somehow beneath the pale winter sunlight, as though the town itself had survived something physical. Ben Carter became briefly famous in the irritating way local journalists sometimes do when larger newspapers suddenly need someone already standing near the truth. He hated every second of it. One afternoon he arrived at Ethan's garage, wearing the same wrinkled coat he had owned for years, while 3 different reporters waited outside the Gazette office, hoping for interviews. "They keep calling me courageous," Ben muttered, dropping into the office chair beside the heater. "I'm not courageous. I'm underpaid and nosy. There's a difference." Ethan laughed quietly, while tightening bolts on an old Jeep engine. Ben paused then, noticing it. The laughter, small, brief, but real. "You know," Ben said carefully, "you've been doing that more lately." Ethan pretended not to understand, but he did. Claire Whitmore resigned from Whitmore & Vale the following Monday. The decision detonated through Seattle's legal community almost instantly. Claire had spent nearly 15 years building a reputation as one of the most efficient corporate litigators on the West Coast. She was known for impossible negotiation wins, ruthless preparation, and the particular emotional distance powerful clients found comforting in attorneys handling billion-dollar projects. People like Claire were not supposed to walk away voluntarily, especially not over conscience. The morning after her resignation became official, she returned to Cedar Bay one final time to pack the rented house overlooking the cliffs. At least that was what she told herself. The house looked strangely empty now. Cardboard boxes lined the hallway. Most of the artwork had already been removed from the walls, leaving pale rectangles where frames once hung. Only the kitchen remained untouched, because Claire had never truly learned how to make the space feel lived in. Near the sink sat Amelia's letters, tied carefully with faded blue ribbon. Claire had finally read them all. Some were funny, some painfully ordinary. One entire letter described Amelia getting lost inside an Italian grocery store in Seattle because she could not stop buying cheeses she couldn't pronounce. Another simply contained photographs of baby Lily covered in spaghetti sauce. None of them accused Claire for disappearing. That somehow made them worse. Across town, Ethan Brooks woke before sunrise the way he always did. Routine had become the architecture holding his life together after Amelia died. He made pancakes slightly too dark on one side because Lily liked them that way, packed her school lunch, then stood outside the garage, sipping coffee while the ocean wind pushed cold air through the marina. Lily watched him from the kitchen window. Children know the emotional weather inside their parents long before adults realize anything shows externally. Her father looked normal, which was exactly how she knew something hurt. He moved through the morning too carefully, too quietly. After breakfast, Ethan drove Lily to school in the old Ford pickup Amelia used to hate because the passenger door only opened from the outside half the time. Before Lily climbed out, Ethan reached automatically to straighten the collar of her jacket. "You picking me up later?" she asked. "Always." She studied him for a second. "Are you sad Claire's leaving?" Ethan looked toward the steering wheel instead of answering immediately. Then he smiled faintly. "Get to class, kiddo." That was not a no. By mid-morning, sunlight had broken fully through the storm clouds, hanging over Cedar Bay for weeks. Ethan rolled open the garage doors and let cold sea air drift through the building while Murphy slept beneath the office desk, snoring softly in old age. The marina felt peaceful again. Then came the sound. A familiar, low engine hum turning onto the gravel road. Lily, returning unexpectedly early from school after a teacher workday assembly cancellation, heard it first and ran immediately toward the garage entrance. The silver Jaguar rolled slowly into the lot beneath bright morning sunlight. Lily stopped short, then grinned. "Dad," she whispered, almost laughing, "it's not Thursday." Claire stepped out holding 2 paper cups of hot chocolate, her dark coat moving lightly in the ocean wind. Without the tension she carried when she first arrived in Cedar Bay, she looked softer somehow, less like someone constantly preparing to leave. Ethan walked toward her slowly. For a moment, neither spoke. The entire marina seemed unusually quiet around them. Finally, Claire looked at him with an uncertainty Ethan had never seen before. "If I stayed in Cedar Bay a little longer," she asked softly, "would that bother you?" Ethan did not answer right away. Instead, he reached past her and pushed the garage doors open wider, allowing warm sunlight to spill deeper inside the building that had spent too many years holding silence. And standing beside Murphy, while the ocean wind drifted through the garage, Lily suddenly realized something important. For the first time since her mother died, home no longer felt like a place her father was surviving alone. Some people enter our lives loudly. Others arrive quietly, like a car pulling into a small garage every Thursday, carrying pain no one else can see. This story was never really about a luxury car, a storm, or even a secret from the past. It was about lonely people learning that grief does not always disappear. Sometimes it simply becomes lighter when someone chooses to stay beside you. Ethan taught us that strength is not always loud. Sometimes strength looks like a single father waking up early every morning to make breakfast for his daughter, even when his own heart is still healing. Claire reminded us that it is never too late to change direction. A person can spend years chasing success and still discover that kindness matters more than winning. And little Lily showed us something adults often forget. Children notice love. They notice sadness. They notice when someone needs a second chance, long before grown people are brave enough to admit it. In everyday life, many of us are carrying silent storms. Some people are grieving, some are exhausted, some are trying to hold their families together while pretending they are fine. That is why gentleness matters more than we realize. Maybe the greatest lesson from Cedar Bay is this: not every family begins at the same time. Not every broken heart heals quickly. But sometimes God sends the right people into our lives exactly when we need them most. If this story touched your heart even a little, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from and what part of the story stayed with you the most. And if you believe God still brings healing, second chances, and unexpected people into our lives for a reason, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you, protect your family, calm every storm you are facing, and bring peace to your home tonight. And if you enjoyed stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next one.